So I read an article in the Atlantic Monthly that argued that parents should not send their kids back to school until we have gun reform legislation. I understand the sentiment, but I gotta tell you, I completely disagree with the article. Let's talk about it in today's video. Hi, I'm Mike Greiner. I'm a lifelong Democratic activist who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. I'm also a lawyer and an academic, and I'm here to help you stand up to the BS of the MAGA crowd. So I share the sentiment with parents, grandparents, and really caring individuals everywhere in the world who are really disturbed about what they've seen in the recent school shooting. What happened in Uvalde was an outrage, and what's more is it was really an entirely preventable outrage if we had different policies here in the United States. And so I have to add my voice to the chorus of many other people who are calling for some kind of change in policy for gun control. I absolutely support it. At the same time as I absolutely support it, as do most Americans, by the way, even most gun owners, by the way, I also am quite pessimistic at the prospects of gun control passing anytime in the near future. Unfortunately, with the way that our system works and that we've set up our Senate and given higher representation essentially to Republican areas, and how the Republican Party now is basically owned lock, stock, and barrel, no pun intended, by the gun lobby, I think it's pretty clear that unless we elect a bunch more Democrats in the next election, any kind of gun control happening is unlikely at best. So I can understand the feelings of Gal Beckerman when he writes that students should refuse to go back to school until we do something about the guns in our society. I mean, there's plenty of evidence out there as to the effectiveness of some type of effort to address the proliferation of guns in our society, and how something needs to happen to stop the repeated school shootings that are happening here in America time and time again. Unfortunately, basically what we're asking for is for our kids to sacrifice once again for the short-sightedness and inability of we adults to address the problems of our own making. I actually had written an article in Medium where I argued that our children should be very angry with us. I mean, think of the things that we've done to them, aside from borrowing against our future, polluting the worlds that they're going to have to inhabit long after we're gone, and destroying American democracy, or hopefully not entirely destroying it at this point, but coming pretty darn close. What kind of world are we leaving our children? It shouldn't be terribly surprising that young people these days are discouraged and depressed. But it goes beyond that. At this point, the mental health crisis among our young people is widely documented. It's unclear what are the reasons for this. There are various theories. Those theories include the proliferation of social media, the lack of sleep and exercise that children are getting nowadays, the increase of their media consumption. But certainly one thing that you cannot argue with that had a very negative impact on our children and our society is the time that we shut down the schools as a result of the COVID pandemic. Now, I'm not going to say that at least some degree of shutdown was necessary for us to address this unprecedented crisis in our country, but I saw close up just how harmful it was to our young people. At the time of the main closures, my grandson was a 6-year-old kindergartner. He stayed with his grandparents, me and my wife, while he was going through this schooling because, frankly, it was too much for his mother to manage while she was also trying to manage her own life. So we were there signing him onto his computer every day where he'd have to participate in virtual classrooms, which, frankly, were run by a very progressive and very effective teacher. Despite the fact that his teacher went to great lengths to try to make everybody feel included and involved and to make this class seem as unvirtual as possible, I remember being there when he cried about the fact that he had to go back onto the computer for schooling. It's just not the same thing. He was at an age where children love to go to school, and he in particular is a child who just loved learning, and yet here he was crying, saying he didn't want to go back on the computer. The truth is, a screen is a poor substitute for the kind of interaction that children need with their peers and with teachers to develop the healthy social skills that they're going to need going forward. What's more is the academic price that children have had to pay is just enormous. I read one study that said that children whose schools went virtual for the longest periods of time experienced as much as a 22-week drop in their learning. It's as if they didn't have school for 22 solid weeks. And when you're aware of the research and realize how hard it is to improve a student's learning by 1 week, losing 22 weeks of schooling is absolutely devastating. I saw the impact of it as well in my work. Just the other day, I was in a meeting on a committee where I serve, where we were discussing the problem of retention among underrepresented minority students. We're very serious about trying to create educational opportunities for students whose backgrounds might have made them less likely to have college education in the past. One of the points that was brought up by one of the members of the committee is the fact that you can track very precisely which students are most likely to drop out based upon which math class they place into at the beginning of their college education. Well, as it turns out, now in addition to the typical challenges we have of getting students up to speed with mathematics the way they should be, now we're finding students coming into college who've spent years learning math virtually, which I gotta tell you, is not a great way to learn math. And as a result, we're starting to see students coming into the college who don't have the kind of math background that's going to enable them to have a successful college career. We Gen Xers and baby boomers should be ashamed of ourselves for the world that we're leaving our children. The fact that we've been unable to grapple with these crises of the threats against our environment, the threats against our democracy, and the crisis of weapons in our society are problems that we have created and that we need to solve. It's unacceptable for us to turn once again to our children and ask them to sacrifice even more as a result of the ineffectiveness, inaction, and irresponsibility of our generations. Well, if you want to see one more very clear example of where the older generations have not done a good job in our role as trustees of the worlds that the future generation is going to inherit, check out this video over here where I talk about some of the absolute appalling tactics that have been used by Republicans regarding the debt limit that Congress has had to grapple with a few times over the past couple of years. I'll see you then. In the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.